right, so now we're just going to go through some practice of applying the quadratic formula. So to use the quadratic formula, we need everything on the same side of the equation equal to 0. And then we are just plugging things into its corresponding letter and then simplifying as much as possible. So we need to make sure that we are following the correct order of operations. I would also recommend having your list of perfect squares nearby because we're going to use that to simplify our radicals. And then we will also be simplifying the fraction part if we can. Okay. So on this first problem, everything is on the same side equal to 0, so I don't need to do anything extra to start with. I just want to start by identifying the a, the b, and the c. So remember, a is always with the x squared, b is with x, and then c is the number without the variable. So now we're just plugging these numbers into our formula and simplifying. So I need the opposite of b, so that will be the opposite of positive 6. So we'll have x equals negative 6 plus and minus, and then our big square root symbol. And then b squared, so that means I'm taking 6 squared, so this will be 36. And this number is always positive because we have to think of it in a parenthesis when we square it. So even if this is a negative number, when we square it, that negative is inside of the parenthesis. So a negative times a negative would give us a positive. And I would just simplify that right away instead of writing it as that b squared. And then we'll have minus 4, which is part of our formula. And then times our a, which in this case is 2. And then times c, which is 7. And then this is all over 2 times a. So this will be 2 times 2. Okay. So now we're just going to work through simplifying. So we will have 6 plus and minus, the square root of something, and then 2 times 2 is 4. So on your calculator, we are going to type what's underneath our square root symbol. We don't want to include the square root symbol. So this will be 36 minus 4 times 2 times 7. And if you would rather use the parentheses instead of the multiplication symbol, that would get you the correct answer as well. And then you're just pressing enter. Okay. All right, so this will simplify to be negative 20. Okay. So now our next step is to simplify our radical. So because it's negative, I know that there's going to be an I. So I'm going to kind of do my work off to the side. And then for 20, we are trying to find the highest perfect square, if any, that divides into it. So again, if you're not sure where to start, we would start with the perfect square that's lower than 20, so the 16. So 16 doesn't divide into 20, neither does 9, but 4 does. So we would want to split 20 as 4 times 5. Okay? And then the square root of 4 is 2, so that would come on the outside. And then the 5 would stay inside of our radical. Okay? So on our next step, I'm replacing this square root of negative 20 with what it simplifies to. So x equals 6 plus and minus 2i square root of 5. And then all over 4. Now, just like with simplifying our complex fractions, when we have that radical in there, it's the same process. So we're looking at all the numbers on the outside, so the 6, the 2, and the 4, and deciding if we can divide them by the same number. So if we can, then we divide each of those by that number. So these are all divisible by 2. And then if we can't divide them by the same thing, at this point we would be done. So x equals 6 divided by 2 is 3, plus and minus. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And because that 1 is going to be multiplied to this I squared of 5, I don't need to write it. But if you prefer to write the 1, that's fine. So this will just become 1i square root of 5. And then this is all over 4 divided by 2, which is 2. Okay. Now remember, because of that plus minus, this represents 2 answers. And at this point in the unit, every time we solve a quadratic equation, we should be coming up with 2 answers. Okay. Now, when you're working on your ALEKS topics, it's not going to give you this plus minus symbol right away. So if you don't see that, we still have to write it as two answers. So the way that we would split it would be 3 plus I square root of 5 over 2, and then you would do a comma, 3 minus I square root of 5 all over 2. Okay. All right, so as we take a look at our next example, notice how this is not all on the same side equal to 0. So our first step is to move this to be on the same side. So that means that we would need to subtract it. So this will be 3x squared minus 5x minus 2 equals 0. Okay. So that means A is 3, B is negative 5, and C is negative 2. So now I'm just plugging those numbers into the quadratic formula. So x equals, opposite of negative 5 is positive 5, plus and minus the square root. Okay, so now b squared, so 5 squared is 25, or negative 5 squared would also be 25, minus 4, and then we're taking it times the a, which is 3, and then times c, which is negative 2. And then that is all over 2 times a, so 2 times 3. And now we're just following order of operations to simplify. So we'll need to figure out what number is inside of our square root, and then 2 times 3 is 6. All right, so on our calculator, remember we are just typing what's underneath the radical, but we aren't including the radical symbol itself. So 25 minus 4 times 3, and then when we do times negative 2, make sure you're using the negative key at the bottom and not your subtraction key. So there's my negative, and then 2. So notice how your negative key and your subtraction key are two different sizes. So when we have that negative number, we need to make sure that we're using the correct key, otherwise we're going to get an error message when we press enter. Okay. All right, so simplifying that to be 49. So next, if we can simplify our square root, that's what we would do next. So again, if you need to check your list, our 49 is on it. So the square root of 49 is 7. So that means on the next step, I'm replacing that 49 with the 7. Okay. So if you need to off to the side as part of your work, we can say that that is 7. Okay. So this will be x equals 5 plus and minus 7 over 6. Okay. Now, if we have the case where this radical simplifies to a real number, so without an I, that means that we can simplify this further. So next, I would need to split this into two separate problems where we are going to simplify 5 plus 7 over 6 and then 5 minus 7 over 6. Okay. So this will be 12 over 6, which is 2. And then 5 minus 7 is negative 2 over 6. And then I can divide each of those by 2. So this will be negative 1 over 3. So the final answers for this one will be x equals 2, comma, negative 1/3. And the order that you write those answers in does not matter. All right, we're going to do 2 more practice problems. Okay. All right, so I would like you to pause the video and then go ahead and work through these next 2 problems. All right, so at the top here, I'm just going to rewrite my quadratic formula so you guys can see that. So x equals opposite of b, and then plus and minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. All right, so on 3, not everything is on the same side, so that is my first step. So we can either subtract the 4x and add the 3 over, or I can add the 2x squared over to be on this side. So I'm going to choose to add this to make it positive. And then as I do that, I'm also going to move my equal sign to be on this side. So this will become a positive 2x squared plus 4x minus 3 equals 0. So this will be my A, B, and C. Okay. So plugging into my formula, x equals negative 4 plus and minus the square root. 16 minus 4 times 2 times negative 3, all over 2 times 2. Okay, so we will need to simplify what's underneath our radical, and then 2 times 2 is 4. Okay. So 16 minus 4 times 2 times negative 3. Again, make sure we're using the negative key for that. Okay. So this will be 40. And then next we have to simplify our radical. So as I'm looking at my list of perfect squares, the highest perfect square that divides into it is 4. Okay, so I'm splitting this as 4 times 10. And then the square root of 4 is 2, so that goes on the outside. 10 stays on the inside. So I'm replacing the square root of 40 with what it simplifies with. So this is x equals negative 4 plus and minus 2 square root of 10 all over 4. And then as I'm looking at this, the negative 4, the 2, and the 4 can all be divided by 2. And if you have a negative in your denominator, this needs to be a positive, so you would just make this a negative. Or if there is a negative down here, then you would divide all of those by negative 1. Okay. All right, so x equals negative 2 plus and minus. And then because if I divide this by 2, I get a 1 here, but I'm taking that 1 times the square root of 10, so I don't need to write it since there's an extra term here with it. So this will be square root of 10, and then 4 divided by 2 is 2. Okay, so that will be my final answer for that problem. Okay. All right, on the next one, we'll need to add this over. So this is x squared plus 34x plus 289 equals 0. Now, if I don't have a number in front, we are assuming that that number is a 1 since we're multiplying. So A is 1, B is 34, and our C is 289. So x equals negative 34 plus and minus the square root, and then 34 squared is 1,156 minus 4 times 1 times 289. Okay, and then this will all be over 2 times our A, which is 1. So x equals negative 34 plus and minus the square root of something all over 2. Okay. All right, so 1,156 minus 4 times 1 times 289. Okay, so we ended up with 0. So the square root of 0 is just 0. So essentially this is just going to cancel out. So x equals negative 34 over 2, which will then simplify to be negative 17. Okay. So this is the one case where we would only have the one solution. And this means on a graph that your vertex is sitting on the x-axis.